So, hello and welcome back to the Disclosure Podcast. I am your host, Ed, and today is a very special podcast. I'm really excited to announce that I'm joined in the studio by Ryan. Ryan is a dairy farmer, and when I announced I was doing the podcast, Ryan reached out to me via email and said, "Oh, look, I'm really interested in coming in and having a discussion with you." And so I asked if he could come to London, and it just so happened he could. And so here we are in the studio together. So thank you so much for being here, Ryan. I'm really very grateful for you reaching out to me. If I could just start by asking, like, what compelled you to kind of want to reach out in the first place?
I was just watching that video where you were announcing your Disclosure podcast, and I was just thinking to myself, I've always wanted to speak to one of the big activists. Like, I've watched you and Joey Carbstrong and a couple more. I've always wanted to have a conversation, so I thought that would be a great way to make it possible.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, this is one of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast, was to hopefully create conversations, and perfect. I'm so happy that you're here. So thank you for making the journey. Belfast is not that far, but it's also not that close. So thank you for taking the time to do this. So I guess the first question, or the first round of questions would be, tell me a little bit about what you do. You live in Northern Ireland, is that right?
Yeah.
And you work on 2 dairy farms, is that right?
Yeah, so I live just outside of Belfast in a small sort of town called Cardiff, just outside of it. And I started working on dairy farms when I was about 12. A neighbour of mine, I got a job with him, and I've been working there ever since. And then about September or maybe October, I got another job on a bigger dairy farm, which is about 20 minutes away from me, and I started working on it. So I've been working on dairy farms for about 5 years.
Yeah. And what are the herd sizes on both those farms?
So the first farm that I started working on is milking about 40 cows. The second farm that I'm working on is milking 200.
It's interesting. And so, which and you might not want to answer this, but which farm do you prefer working on?
Well, I probably prefer on the 40 cow one. It's
Yeah,
easier
the small
on me.
Right.
And I've just been there for longer. And they're all Jersey cows, whereas the other ones are Friesians, Holsteins, and I prefer the wee Jerseys.
And their temperament, you mean, or?
Yeah, they don't give as much milk. They're a wee bit smaller, and they're just easier to work with. They're nice and relaxed, and behave themselves. When
you say easier to work with, what do you mean by that?
Well, they're just easier to handle because they're that much smaller, and they wouldn't be as like when you bring them into the parlour, they'd just be quiet. Whereas the Friesians would be hitting their heads and trying to get food out of the feeders, and they'd just be probably wouldn't say a lot more curious, but just a lot more hyper, sort of. Do
you ever find it dangerous working with the cows? Because obviously they are big animals.
Yeah, they are big animals. With bulls, definitely you need to be careful. They can be dangerous because at the end of the day they are animal, so a lot of them will act on instinct. Mm-hmm. So but so far so good. Never had any really bad injuries or anything, and
that's good.
They've all been pretty good for me.
And you have bulls on the farms as well?
So on the small one there's just one bull, and on the big one there's just one bull too.
Mm-hmm. And what's the bull's purpose is for breeding?
Breeding, yeah.
And so you use presumably AI on both farms?
No, we don't use AI on the small farm, and they did use AI on the big farm. Now, I'm never there for that because I'm just sort of milking. Mm-hmm. I don't really agree with AI. On the small farm, the bull is for breeding purposes because he can manage that, whereas on the bigger farm, I think they use a bit of AI because the bull can't do 200 cows.
No, definitely not.
You need a couple.
So take me through. Well, if we do like the small farm first.
Yeah.
So the bull is brought into a pen with a cow who is ready, who's fertile, I guess is the word, and then they just procreate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's never really set up, to be honest, because the cows are always together. So he just sort of does it when he wants. And that first farm that I work on, it isn't that high tech, so we're never really checking and scanning them and all. We just sort of, the farmer I work with, he's an older man and he's quite wise. We just sort of, he can tell you. But they're never really putting a pen or anything. The only time that would be done would be maybe the dry cows who are coming up to calving. Maybe if one of them needed served, or one was up there that shouldn't have been up there, we might move the bull up there and let him go ahead.
And on the bigger farm, how does that process work?
Well, it builds in with a set of cows, and then the other set are AI.
Okay.
So the AI guys would come in. They're in quite often. I just see the van. I've never really took much notice of it, because I don't really agree with AI. Although I do see the benefits sometimes, because I know AI can now have sexed semen, so you can get female cows, which stops the killing of bull calves anyway. But it's not a very nice process. I don't really.
And so when you
get it.
No, when you say you don't agree with it, you mean you don't agree with it from like an ethical perspective?
Yeah, just sort of the way it's all handled. I just think it's just sort of be let it happen naturally.
Yeah, I mean,
probably easier on the cow.
Well, yeah, I think we can probably all agree on that. I mean, and as you probably know, I think one of the points of dairy farming that often vegans point out is the artificial insemination, and they say, it's not consensual, and for anyone listening who doesn't necessarily know the process is quite grim. They get the semen from the bull. That's often, I guess, done by hand or by some sort of machinery, but it's a I don't know. It's a creepy thing almost, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's the vet or the farmer or someone will acquire the semen from the bull. We can kind of all use our imaginations probably to work that one out, and then the semen will go on ice, to preserve it. The AI team or the vet will come into the farm. The person who's doing the insemination, they'll put a glove on their arm and they put their arm inside the cow's anus, and they hold her cervix in place through the lining of the anus. They then get the semen, and through some sort of syringe catheter thing, they inject the semen inside the cervix of the cow. So, it's a very invasive procedure. It's not one that I'm sure the cows would enjoy. We agree on that. I guess the issue is if we're producing enough dairy to meet demand, there has to be a system in place that is reliable. That means there's a consistent turnover of new calves, so the farmers are consistently producing enough milk to make money. And so, for an industry to be profitable on the scale it's at, it's probably the only way to maintain it. I mean, what do you think? Do you agree or disagree?
Well, like on the small farm, we would get quite a lot of bull calves. But he wouldn't really raise, even if he did get female calves, he wouldn't raise them that much. It's very expensive. That's the only thing with AI. It is quite expensive. So it is for the bigger farms. Like I know farms of 100 herd size or 80 herd size all around us that would all still use bulls. But yeah, for the bigger farms, for them to be able to make it a profit, they would definitely use it. Although, we don't kill any of our bull calves.
No,
we just run them on for beef or raise them and sell them on once they get to a certain age.
So you take them to auction markets, or you have people coming?
People who would buy them, but sometimes we would take them to an auction and sell them on.
So I guess, like as you said, we don't kill the bull calves ourselves, but I guess in a way you still sell them on to be killed in the long run. So even though you don't directly kill them, by the fact that they're produced because of what you do, they're still killed because of what you do, if that makes sense.
But they will be killed for a purpose.
It obviously, this is obvious what the purpose is, but tell me, what is the purpose of why we kill the animals?
For what they give us, their products. Meat is the main thing. Their veal isn't really eaten that much in this country, nor
rose veal, but it's it's a bit, it's not like it used to be, so to speak.
Yeah. But yeah, it's used for the product they give us.
Yeah, and when you say give us, it's, for me, it's an interesting. I think language is really important, and when we use words like give, it's almost like it's a mutual offering. And I guess the way I would phrase it is for the things that we take from them. Do you think that they willingly give us meat and flesh and even milk, or do we take that?
Yeah, it's interesting because we don't really know what the animals are thinking that much. But I would probably doubt they would offer us it, but it's sort of what we do.
Yeah, and I guess the question of it's what we do. I guess is, do we have to? Do we have to do it?
I would say yes. For nutritional purposes, I know you'll probably disagree, and environment definitely.
All right, that's interesting. All right, so let's do I guess the nutrition one. Meat, protein, milk, calcium, probably you're going to say like vitamin D and things like that as well. I mean, I guess the question is it exclusively from these products, or can we get them from plant-based sources?
You can get other from plant-based sources, bar vitamin D.
Yeah, you can get D2, but vitamin D is the sunshine vitamin, and in the UK, regardless of whether we eat dairy or not, we should all be supplementing vitamin D anyway.
Yeah.
We can get supplemented soya milk and stuff. But yeah, okay. Sorry, carry
on. But then I don't think that plant-based products are as dense of nutrients. Collectively, you'd probably be eating a lot more plant-based foods than what you could get from milk or say beef. Like red meat, it's quite high in iron.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at the plant-based, like plants that are high in iron, they're high, but they're not as dense. So you'd have to eat a lot more. And plants are quite fibrous, so if you're eating, you're going to feel fuller, and it's harder to get that many nutrients, from.
Yeah, I mean, I think you are right in saying that a lot of these products maybe contain higher levels of certain things. I mean, the red meat and iron thing, of course, is there's no denying that red meat has lots of iron in, and in the interest of fairness, the thing about iron from animal-based sources is it's heme iron, right? Mm-hmm. And from plant-based sources, it's non-heme iron, and there are arguments that heme iron is better obtained from the body than non-heme, but the other alternative to it with the non-heme is that it's better absorbed when you have it with vitamin C, and so iron, when combined with vitamin C, it creates a better absorption process in the body, and the plant-based sources of iron often are coupled with vitamin C. We look at broccoli and green leafy vegetables are often an example of that. And I would argue that it's still easy to obtain all the things that we need to get from a plant-based diet. But even if we say it's not, and we say it's a little bit harder, and you have to eat maybe 100 grams more beans to get the same protein as you would from one steak, and so you've got to eat a little bit more of certain things to get the same levels. And I would say it's probably nothing more than an inconvenience to us. Do you think that inconvenience then justifies taking an animal's life if it is something as simple as, you have to have some kale in a smoothie to make sure you're getting the calcium you need in the day or something? Do you still think that justifies taking their life?
That alone probably doesn't justify taking this life, but I think there's a lot more that plays into it than just inconvenience. Like if you look at obviously plants are grown here, but not everything you eat is grown here. So you're adding on food miles. Then we look local economy, then it's affected because obviously exporting, importing, it tastes too, although people think it's a stupid factor, it is a big factor. People do enjoy food for how it tastes.
Yeah, I think it's the biggest reason. I think people will point at nutrients and stuff, but the bottom line I think is for many people it is taste, and taste is an interesting thing, and we'll come on to that. But you also mentioned the environment. So you say, from a nutritional perspective, you'd argue potentially it's a necessity, or maybe it's not a necessity, but there are factors in there that make it potentially worthwhile doing. What about from an environmental perspective? What is it about dairy farming, or indeed any form of animal farming, sheep or even pig and chicken? Obviously, the environmental impact of that's probably a lot more debatable, but let's say kind of sheep and dairy and cattle farming, what are the environmental benefits of that?
Well, I'm all about grass-fed, so 2 farms I work on are grass-fed animals outside, and I think it's pretty essential to the ecosystem for grass-fed bases. Like, I know the stat in 2016 was that agriculture is 10% of all UK's greenhouse emissions. Mm-hmm. But then when you look at the land mass, agriculture takes up 70% of all UK land. So if you put it in perspective, businesses are 17% of greenhouse gases, and they probably don't even make up a quarter of the land.
Oh, definitely not. Yeah.
So when you look at it in that ratio, is it really that much for something that's taking up so much land and it's feeding the country? And like grassland, like grazing land that we have, you couldn't grow a crop on it. And if we were to stop dairy farming, stop putting cows in it, the carbon in the soil would be lost, the organic fertilizer we gain from them would be lost, and that land would just lie dormant because you couldn't grow. It's too rocky or it's too rough. Like nowadays, if we were to go vegan, we'd be under too much pressure not to have a famine or not to have a failed crop, because we are relying on it. That if we couldn't find right growing land or whatever, they wouldn't bother.
Yeah, I mean, I may forget certain points, so please pull me up on them if I do. But so the first thing was looking at kind of local and air miles and stuff, and I do actually really agree with you. And one thing that concerns me a little bit is sometimes vegans who say, "Oh, being vegan's better for the environment," but and then we are buying products that are taken from South America or something. And so I do think that we have to look at where products come from, even if they're fruits and vegetables and grains and such as well. And I don't think that simply because something is a plant-based product, it's therefore, wonderful for the environment. I'd make the argument it's still better. And, New Zealand lamb, for example, I think like 40% of the lamb eaten in this country is New Zealand lamb, and the air miles and something like that are completely atrocious. But of course, you're not advocating for that. It's more of just a general point. So the local kind of air miles aspect of it, I think, plays a part in terms of fossil fuel usage and like an environmental factor. But at the same time, you have to look at kind of the system as a whole, and greenhouse gas emissions are one part of the problem with animal agriculture. Methane is, I think often people use methane as like the be all and end all of the argument, when actually I think it's just one component of the argument, and it doesn't represent all of the problems within the industry. And part of that problem is land usage as well. And I don't know the statistic you're referring to, so I'm not going to try and dispute the 10% statistic you said. As I say, I don't know the source for it. But even if it is true, as you say, was it 70% of agriculture? Right. So 70% of land in this country is used for agriculture. And you're right in saying that some of that land, and maybe there's some land you're referring to, wouldn't be suitable for arable farming. And so it's suitable for animal farming, but not arable. But my argument would be that environmentally, the best thing to do with that land then is not necessarily to rear animals or even to produce, to put manure on it necessarily, but it's to leave that land alone. And in doing so, what we can do is the natural lands will replenish. So if you look at the UK in general, I guess it's because 70% of the land is used for agriculture. It's just completely flat. And historically, the UK was a really vibrant ecosystem with woodlands and forestlands and a huge diversity of animals, deer and I think probably wild boar and such. Maybe back in the day, I don't know about that so much. But it was a really vibrant environment and landscape. And due to agriculture, we've wiped out so much of that environment. And so for the environment and for the purpose of, like, say, carbon absorption, and the absorption of greenhouse gas emissions, surely the best thing to do would be just to let that land grow, let that land replenish. Because even if we swap to a vegan diet, we're going to have to increase the level of certain fruits and vegetables we produce. Potatoes, maybe turnips. I'm thinking of traditional British produce. You said leeks earlier was something you used to produce. So, in a vegan world, we'll probably have to produce more of certain crops and mainly vegetables and fruits. But overall, the amount of land we'll need to do so will come down so considerably that we can let so much of the agricultural land just replenish. And do you think that would be better for the environment than rearing animals just for the sake, because you can't you can't produce plants on that land?
I'm not sure, because I think animals probably do benefit from a lot of grassland at the minute, because we don't treat our grass as much as crops are treated, and there'd still be wildflowers and still be meadows, like cows would drink from water that would lie, in the bottom of the field. And there's a whole new movement on hedgerows. In Ireland, we're mad for hedges.
Yeah, right.
Obviously, and the new way that subsidies are working on farms when we leave the EU are to do with what you do on your farm for the environment.
It's just, could you, I'm not 100% clued in on that. Could you maybe talk a little bit more about what will happen with subsidies when we leave the European Union?
Yeah, so I've only heard a few things. So at the minute, subsidies from the EU are to do with how much land you actually own.
Okay.
And that is because they see it as you have more land to take care of, you'll get more money. But when we leave, I think we will still get EU subsidies for 2 years, maybe.
Okay.
And then it'll come back to whatever the UK sets in place. And at the minute, they're talking about farmers will get more for what they do for the environment on their farm. So let's say you have a field of crops. If you grow a wild sort of headland around it of just wild plants, you'll get money. If you're planting trees, hedges, and all the rest of them, because there was a farm near us that actually ripped out a load of hedges, and they actually got their subsidies cut because they see that as a bad thing. So it's to try push farmers to do more for the environment.
Well, I mean, of course, that seems like a good idea. If I interrupted you for something you were going to say, then please do say it. But another thing with the grass-fed issue is, I think like 90% of the animal products we consume are factory farmed. And of course, the levels of factory farming in sheep and beef and I guess to some degree dairy are significantly reduced compared to chicken and pig consumption. Of course, chickens are the animals we most by far factory farm and most by far consume. But even if we took, it becomes difficult because of course you could have grass. I mean, it wouldn't be grass-fed pigs, because that's not what they consume. But you could have outdoor reared pigs. Yeah. But if we were to outdoor rear the animals to the same kind of level of the same comparable level that grass-fed dairy or grass-fed cattle means with pigs and chickens, if 70% of the land is already used for agriculture, how will we meet people's demand that currently exists in a system that you're potentially championing with so little land left to utilize?
You see, that is the thing. Meat consumption and all would have to reduce, just as it was.
Yeah.
It had, at the minute, it is at astonishing levels because people don't want to eat vegetables. People don't want to eat, people go into KFC and just buy meat. Like, there's nothing there. And it is pretty mad. Like, I don't advocate it at all. And definitely don't advocate factory farming either. And in order for us to be able to, it would have to go back to the way it was. People would have to drop their meat consumption dramatically. Well, maybe not dramatically, but back to the way it was, like, meat and more vegetables and stuff.
Yeah. I guess the problem with that would be if we drop the supply, the reason animal products are so cheap and you can go into KFC and get, chicken burger or whatever at such cheap prices because it's so easy to produce, and breed and ultimately kill chickens. But if we were to then reduce the amount that we supply because we rear them in that way, the price of these products will go up. And it becomes, I guess, somewhat of almost a class issue in a sense of when you say about going back to the way things used to be. Well, that was the people who had money and were wealthy could afford these products, and those who couldn't weren't able to. And so, for me, part of the issue with that is it becomes a financially, it becomes a situation or a system which is based purely on people's personal finances, and that also doesn't. Not that I think it's the animals the ones who I think get the raw deal, of course, in any of these situations, but it also seems fair to that only the rich people can then enjoy the products that the poor people would still like to enjoy, but can't because of the economical factors.
I guess food prices would rise, but then I would say I would not think a vegan diet is that cheap either. With them bringing out genetically engineered, they're able to grow meat sort of from cells, is it?
Oh, lab-grown meat,
Lab-grown meat. So I'm sure that wouldn't be very cheap, when it first comes out. And fruit and vegetables aren't that cheap at off-season.
No.
And I think both ways food price would increase. But I think if food prices were to increase and we were still farming locally, the economy would increase and sort of pay would increase, Yeah. Well, I would hope.
It's challenging, right? And I guess with the fruit and vegetable prices, I mean, lab-grown meat, I don't really advocate. Not really that. I don't like the idea of it. I guess the thing is, when theoretically it'll be expensive at the beginning, but it'll probably become cheap really quickly because it's just produced without any need for crops and water or human labor, really, or anything like that. But with fruits and vegetables and things like that, I guess one of the problems that some of these products become more expensive is to do with the fact that subsidies aren't put into healthier, when I say healthier, I mean fruit and vegetable foods. And so what I would like to see is, as meat consumption drops, and if, the way that we see the future going, it has to drop for, in both of our minds, I suppose, the price of it will go up. And the subsidies that we will put into animal-based farming, if they were put into arable farming and plant-based farming, it would bring the price of these products down dramatically. And I think that to me has to be the crux of where we look moving forward, to make it that, it's not the 99 pence chicken burger that's like seen as the staple of like a cheap person's diet, but actually it's the fruits and vegetables and things like blueberries and strawberries, which are expensive, really. Like £2.50 for a punnet of strawberries in Sainsbury's is not, I don't think that's good, but we could dramatically bring the price of these foods down if we just reallocated subsidies in a more even if just a more equal way between all types of farming. I feel like animal farmers for some reason get a better deal than arable farmers, and I don't that doesn't strike me as fair anyway. You know, why would I don't know. That's my feelings about it. But yeah, I think environmentally that there's a lot of kind of different issues at play, and you know, globally, animal farming presents a huge problem. You look at the US and South America, but one thing I'm really, really cautious of is that, you know, we look at, I mean, you've probably heard of Cowspiracy, right? Right. And yeah, right. And what's your opinion on it?
I do think it is mainly focused on the big factory farms.
Right.
And I didn't agree with it, obviously, because I'm not for big factory farms.
Yeah, and I think one thing we have to be really careful of is when we advocate something, especially environmentally, but you know, also ethically, that we're not saying, oh, well, you know, these farmers in Britain, you know, they're not the same as Texan cow farmers that are importing soya from Brazil, you know, and I'm not going to hold you personally responsible for soya farming, you know, in the cattle farming industry necessarily in Brazil. I mean, I'm sure some soya is exported to this country as well, but at the same time, I think it's really important that we keep the arguments kind of solidified in terms of what's relevant to where we are. And so, you know, in this country, we're looking at, you know, deforestation and woodlands and things like that. We're still looking at methane emissions, you know, so environmentally there's still issues. And there's been some studies that came out recently that looked at these problems, particularly in the UK, and they've been published in some really credible journals. One of them was published in a journal called Science, one of them was published in a journal called Nature, and the other was published in The Lancet. And they agreed that a global shift to a plant-based diet was necessary to combat some of the problems of climate change. I mean, have you seen some of these studies that have been released? Or?
I think I heard of the one you were talking about in your BBC interview. And then, but then I was also looking at ones that are complete opposite.
Okay.
They're saying the opposite thing. They're saying that beef. There was one about beef that I was reading this morning. I just have it on my phone. Was talking about how they can't find that like animals are constantly being blamed for this big greenhouse gas and this big environment, you know, sort of. But like when you look at it, at what else we're doing, bar the farming, like a car.
Yeah.
There's approximately 9.92 million cows in the UK.
Mm-hmm. Is that just in the dairy herd or in the beef herd?
That's in both, I think.
Both herds, okay.
So they're producing, I think it's something like a ton of carbon, 1.2 tons or something per cow a year. So that's somewhere around 10 million tons per year. Whereas a car, on average, is producing 150 grams of carbon per kilometre. And an average of 15,000 kilometres a year, that's 2 tons.
2 tons of which gas are we looking at?
Well, that would be carbon dioxide, but methane is a bit lower than carbon dioxide, but when it's put into equivalent, the damage it does to greenhouse gas, it's around 10%, just as them.
So they say that the methane has over a 10-year period, 86 times the global warming potential of CO2. So methane from an environmental perspective is worse than CO2. I mean, we can all agree that driving cars is not great. But it doesn't diminish the responsibility that animal agriculture plays. And like I said, there's all the other factors as well, land usage, you know. And if we equate, and it's not just methane for, it's not just cows versus cars necessarily. It's the argument of for grass-fed beef, you have to level potentially forest lands. What trees do best is absorb CO2, release oxygen. So you have to equate that aspect of, well, how much CO2 is, or how much CO2 is not being absorbed as a consequence of clearing acres of land to produce grass-fed beef, for example. So I think there's other factors at play there that don't make it a like for like necessarily. Although, I mean, one thing I'm really cautious of with the environmental side of things is not to say veganism is the answer to all of these problems. If everyone was vegan, we could drive big gas guzzlers and consume plastics and, you know, buy clothes from Primark and that. I mean, we've got to address all these things. You know, part of that, I said before, is where are we exporting fruits and vegetables from? And of course, part of that's travel as well. But I don't think that diminishes, these other aspects diminish the fact that being vegan is the single simplest thing we can do in our lives. I mean, some of us rely on cars, but if we've got Tesco's and Sainsbury's and stuff, we don't rely on steaks and cheeses. You know, we don't need brie to live, or, you know, or camembert or red Leicester, but many of us do need certain other things that contribute negatively to the environment to get by. What do you think?
Yeah, I do agree that some of the products aren't essential to life. But then if you look at what's really essential to life, it would just be your basics. I'm sure you like to eat nice vegan food.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, right.
But I think that the agriculture industry is constantly developing new ways for to reduce these emissions. Like it's literally like for deforestation, it's very hard. It'd be very hard to get permission without you having to plant again a certain number. Like let's say 85% of what you cut down would have to be replanted, maybe in a different area or along your hedges or whatever. If you were making a field, and nutritionists are also constantly working with animal feeds to figure out a way to feed cows, which allows them to produce less methane.
Yeah,
with just with what they're eating.
But it's like little steps when we could just take one big step. And if the United Nations reports it to be believed that we have 12 years, and I really hope these are dramatic. I think there's so much at stake that we kind of have to take them with some seriousness. And if that is the case, then like little steps just don't seem to solve the problem. It's time for us to take big action now, and planting some hedgerow to make way for the fact that you've cleared forest lands to raise methane emitting cows. That doesn't seem like a good enough compromise to the situation, the severity of the situation. It's kind of like, putting a plaster when you've got a big gaping wound. It's like a tiny solution for something that's not actually going to help in the long run.
Yeah, but I don't think that becoming vegan or the world going vegan or whatever would solve it, because like when you look at things like avocados even coming from California, I think it's a whole transport system too. Mm-hmm. And grasslands, I do believe, still are necessary, especially like if you were to take sheep off mountains. Grass has 4 stages of growing, and when it gets to the last stage, it dies, obviously, and then it sort of just rots away in the ground. That's a really long process. Mm-hmm. And if we don't have the natural herbivores that we did, if you go back thousands of years, they would naturally roam, and once they've eaten the grass down, they would move to another pasture in these big herds of like buffalo and stuff that we have now. No grass would sort of be left, because once it dies, it has to rot. No grass can come up until it's fully rotted away, and that would be like a 2-year process. I do believe that these wild gardens, if you're talking about leaving grass to grow for, let's say, honeybees,
okay,
because I believe that if you were to move to a vegan world, the honeybees would definitely suffer, because like we see plenty of bees around our farm, obviously. I don't know if you've ever seen Food Incorporated. I'm sure you have.
Oh, I saw it years ago. I don't remember it, but it was one of the first ones I watched.
But there's a farmer on it called Joel Salatin, and he is a very big advocate of what's called the permaculture sort of way,
right.
Using everything and growing everything. But his farm was found to have 9 types of honeybee, and he was grass feeding everything. And like if you're to move the crop, the amount of chemicals that are going to be used more.
You are right in saying that we don't have the herbivorous animals. We don't have the predatory animals, and I think part of that is because we've cleared so much land, that we've driven so many animals to the point of extinction, or even beyond that. And if we were to allow the land that we don't need, which that study that I cited in the BBC article, just for anyone who's listening who's not aware of it, the study that I cited that we both kind of referred to was a 5-year study by the University of Oxford. It looked at 40,000 farms in 119 countries, and is regarded as being the most comprehensive study ever looking at the relationship between farming and the environment. And it was published in this journal called Science. And anyway, it said that globally, if the world shifted to a plant-based diet, we could reduce the amount of agricultural land, farmland, by 75%. So, in the UK, it might not be as high as 75%. It might be higher. I mean, it probably isn't higher. But let's say, even if it's only 50%, that's 50% of land that we don't need anymore, that we can just allow to replenish. And of course, it may take longer for maybe grass to go through the natural seasons of growing and dying and then becoming fertilizer and replenishing the soils with those nutrients. But that's still a natural process. And I think we have to hit the reset button. And sometimes it takes a while for that reset to happen, but it's important for it to happen, just to kind of stabilize that road that we're going down and just maybe bring us to a halt in a way. And I don't deny again for a second that there are certain elements of what you do in terms of farming that contribute and help in some environmental ways, such as the honeybees, for example. But that doesn't mean it's the only way to help honeybees, and it doesn't mean that that negates all the negatives of it as well. You know, a couple of positives here and there doesn't negate for all the huge swaths of negatives. Avocados, yeah. Let's not ship avocados from Mexico, Peru, and California. I'm on board for that one as well, by the way.
I just think you talk about it as like all these couple of positives, but I do genuinely believe there are, like, the positives do outweigh the negatives in the way we're moving forward. Like, if we did stop breeding cows into existence and we stopped using the grasslands, it would be so hard to be allowed to just let them grow. You know, I believe with the growing population, the growing demand for housing and everything, it would just be turned to building. And we would start, you know, like, if you look at forests and stuff, there's not many forests now that aren't needed to be looking after.
No, well, yeah, we need to protect them, of course.
And I believe these grasslands would sort of have to be looked after too by somebody. And it's,
well, maybe just by, in the same way that forest lands are protected, you know, there should just be council or even government kind of regulations in place that just mean leave this alone. And it doesn't mean that people can't own the land, and, you know, maybe they can be given, I think subsidies maybe are given, or something is given to some farmers, they just leave the land. So maybe we just leave it alone, and the amount of extra housing we'll need, it still doesn't equal 70% of UK land. You know, I mean, yes, a little bit, but maybe 2, 3, 4%. But more importantly, with the growing population thing, is how are we going to feed even more people with these products? I mean, if we agree that it's not sustainable with factory farming and it's not ethical with factory farming, and therefore the only, in your eyes, ethical ways is to do grass-fed animal products or completely outdoor reared animal products, and that's, you know, the only way that you believe it for it to be maybe sustainable in many ways, how do we then feed even more people with a product that we've already agreed has to come down significantly and not worry about prices shooting up and all these other issues? And there comes a point where it doesn't seem to add up in my head how we can have more people but produce less products and not have all these other issues with pricing and people being disgruntled. And surely the world just needs to go towards a plant-based diet, even with the way you think as well.
Well, I wouldn't say that, because I think the same way when I think about the world moving towards a plant-based diet. Like, I think how we manage to grow all them crops, how would we have the land, how would we deal with, let's say, a famine, how would we deal with price? You know, it sort of works both ways in my mind. I just believe in a balanced, moderate diet. Like, I don't believe in drinking gallons and gallons of milk.
No.
You know, I don't believe in eating tons and tons of meat. I just mean, you know, 70% plant, you know, 30% meat or animal products. Like, I do believe there's two sort of extremes, and the best way moving forward would just be sort of meet in the middle.
So would you say that's like a Flexitarian style thing? And are you a fan of like the Flexitarian movement in that way? I feel like a betrayal almost to say that.
I think it's good to try things.
Okay.
You know, I wouldn't say you have to meet every day, obviously not. My brother was sort of Flexitarian for a while. They'd have meat once a week, and that's still a good way to enjoy the nutrition and the taste and the health of it, and still have a sort of good, you know, it's still helping the environment in a way because you're reducing your consumption of that much meat. But I don't think cutting it out and cutting milk and eggs and it all out, I just can't see it in a mass scale really solving the problem.
Yeah, well, I would like to, maybe we can move it on a little bit, just so we don't get too hung up on the same thing. But I think, and we'll let you respond to this, I don't want to be like, let's move it on, here's my final point. But I do think one thing to bear in mind is that because we are producing so many animals, and we, as you say, we have 9 million cows, and a lot of those cows may be grass-fed, some of them won't be, some of them will be fed, you know, I mean, a lot of silage, I suppose, which is, you know, grass, exactly. But also we have a lot of animals, and globally especially, that are not consuming necessarily grass and silage, and also are eating things like maize and wheat and barley and soya, and foods that we grow. And so if we slaughter, say, conservatively 56 billion land animals in this country, around 1 billion land animals that are all being fed something, you know, the amount of cows and stuff, a very small percentage of those animals being killed, you know, the ones that have been killed the most, the chickens and the pigs, and are the ones who are factory farmed and fed what I guess we'd say, quote unquote, unnatural foods, perhaps. This is why I think even in a vegan world, we have plenty of land already, and there's enough crop growing land that we can utilize anyway, simply because of the fact that we're having to feed these animals food to begin with. And there's also vertical farming. I mean, have you heard of vertical farming?
Yeah, isn't that like growing plants and stuff on rooftops and sort of.
Yeah, or just in big warehouses, and it uses 95% less water. There's no pesticides, herbicides. You don't have to worry about like invasive species or like crop deaths, animals and crop deaths, that argument as well. That seems like a really good way moving forward. And so maybe that'll be something that in the future is kind of great, because then we don't have to worry. We can use even less land but produce even more, and then you don't have to worry about air miles or travel miles, because you could produce any product you wanted in any country because it's all self-contained within these buildings. So if we're worried about avocados, well, you can grow avocados in a warehouse in London with vertical farming, and all of a sudden it's like the best of both worlds. It's almost like having your vegan cake and eating it. And I'm a little bit hesitant to like get too excited about vertical farming, but I do think that's a really great option moving forward.
I think definitely with the growing population and the growing demand for food, it probably is a good way, but I wouldn't be so keen on it, because it's like, I'm not a big fan of genetic modified crops or crops that are grown inside. You sort of want them to be getting natural sunlight and natural rain and everything else. And I do agree that it would be hard to do that for the world. That would be my point. But that's why I probably wouldn't be, I think few people like wouldn't be a big keen on their crops being grown inside. And then the argument you have about cows being fed maize and stuff, well, there's only so many products that you can make with maize. Like, well, maize is actually corn before it, so we can't eat maize. But that's why we grow a lot of maize in this country, sort of, because we can't grow corn right on that well. That's why a lot of corn comes from America and other countries that are hotter. So we harvest it and we feed it to our cows.
But the land could be used.
It could be used for other crops, but then there's only so much cereals and all that we do feed the cows, that products you can make from them. Like, we don't want to be eating corn constantly.
No, certainly not. Nor should we advocate for that. But the land is there to use, and it's not like we have to eat the same products that have been grown on that land necessarily.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're happy to move on, maybe past the environment, because it's a fascinating thing, but I know I do worry about talking about it too much. And please, if you've got anything you want to say, like any questions, just butt in. Like, I'm not offended by people being butting in, but I guess let's go back to maybe what happens on the farm. We talked a little about artificial insemination, and I guess the process after artificial insemination is there's the pregnancy, the gestation, and then there's the birth. And as I say, on both farms, the babies are taken from their mothers, or even on the smaller one as well.
Yeah.
So they have their colostrum, which is the first feed with the antibodies. Is it, how do I pronounce it again?
Colostrum.
Oh,
colostrum, or whatever.
Whichever way it is. Which is basically the first feed, the first milk, which isn't fit for human consumption, but importantly has all the antibodies that the newborn calf needs. And without it, they will probably, most often die. And so after the first feed, how old are they when they're taken away? 24 to 72 hours?
Yeah, it depends. On small farms, we're left for about a day or two, and the new farm, a day, really.
So so it's pretty similar. And how do you feel about that? You said that AI you didn't feel very comfortable about. What about the separation aspect? Do you like that, I suppose?
I suppose it isn't the nicest thing when you first are there and you're like, oh, the mother's been taken away. But there's a lot of factors to play into it. Like, cows these days produce too much milk that one calf could not drink all the milk she has, and that is due to selective breeding. But that has been happening for years, and we can't change that. So I would never advocate leaving a dairy cow with her calf, because she'd probably lose her quarters, and then if she was to ever calve again, there'd be no milk for that calf, and she could get sick, she could get ill. I see that now calves tend to get sick very quickly, and they do need a lot of sterile conditions, and it is necessary to get that colostrum into them. Sometimes, let's say a cow's udder is too low and the calf can't get drinking on it, that's when we have to come in and take the colostrum and then feed it by hand to the calf. And also, cows are very careless. Like, I've seen cows near stand on their calves, or some of them reject them, some of them are aggressive towards them, some of them have no interest. And I suppose it is sad. You think, oh, that's sad, but if they're left for too long, that's when they'll really get attached. But the cows, like people say, cows roar out, maybe on certain farms, but on our farm, the cows, maybe it's the breed of them, but they're never too bad.
When you say too bad, what does that mean?
Well, like they might be a wee bit odd. you can sort of tell that they're a wee bit off, that something, they sort of know that something's wrong, or they know that something's missing.
Wrong? You say wrong?
Well,
sorry to pick your words, but I think it's important when you say wrong.
Yeah, definitely. Wrong, or like something's not right to them, or something's not funny, but they don't go on and on and on. It's like one day and they're back to normal.
Mm-hmm.
It is necessary, I do believe.
Necessary in for farms to survive.
Necessary for farms and necessary for both of their health.
Do you think the fact that we've selected, because you're right in saying that cows in farms do have to be milked because we've selectively bred them to produce so much milk, but that doesn't justify the industry. It just proves how far the industry has gone. And so, I think the argument of, cows have to, it's almost sometimes people say to me, oh, the cows walk themselves to the milking parlor. And it's like, well, I'm not surprised because they need something, because I'm sure that must hurt, and it's probably not a very nice sensation needing to be milked in that way. So the notion of like something doesn't mean they're willing participants in their own exploitation necessarily. It's just, it's a means to relieve some suffering. So, I mean, do you mean, let's go back to that, but I do want to just focus a little bit more on the separation aspect of it. Cows are maternal. They form, matriarchal herds, which is quite unique. We think about, male dominance or whatever, but like a female, like matriarchal herds. And so they are primarily driven by maternal, and herds are familial, so families, and they spend their whole lives together. So that family bond is very strong within a cattle herd, so to speak. And so maybe, yes, that the elements of grieving may not be so so obvious as they are in some farms. I mean, in some farms I'm sure they do. I mean, the gentleman on the podcast last week, which I think you said you listened to, he said that the cows were a lot more visibly shaken up on the farms he worked out. And I'm sure it differs farm to farm depending on how it's done. When the calves are taken, how does the farmer take the cow? I mean, have you ever taken? Do you pick them up, or do you carry them? Do you drag them with No.
We just lift them. Usually, it's not really that far to the calf pen. Either lifted or set in like a trolley. Pushed if it's far distance on the bigger farm. Sometimes we would never drag, or you see some of these intensive farms literally grabbing them and hanging, dragging them, and not really giving care. But sort of because we want them to be like. You don't want to lose a calf because it's money to a farmer. At the end of the day, if you're losing a calf, you're losing money that you could potentially get for that calf, or you're losing, it is a product. It's an animal, and it is money at the same time. Like if you're dragging a calf about and it gets sick, you're going to have veterinary bills, you're going to have everything. So we try to carry them. That's why we want to separate them, keep them in a sterile environment, ensure they're getting what they need to be healthy and to be okay.
So you would say that the reason that you don't drag them is because it's potentially money lost, rather than you think that it's wrong to do so?
Well, it's completely wrong. Like, it's not just money. Obviously, like, I would never want to hurt an animal. We don't beat animals.
But you see a paradox. I never want to hurt an animal, but there's money to be made and we kill them at the end.
We kill them, but I would never want to torture an animal. We take their life quickly, and it is upsetting, but it's something that you if you're going to eat meat, you have to be able to look the animal in the eye and accept. I don't know if you've ever heard of a farmer, sort of YouTuber as well from America, Justin Rhodes.
I think I know the name, but I'm not familiar with his content necessarily.
Yeah, he like a homestead sort of thing.
Okay.
Kills his own chickens.
Right, I probably have seen some of his stuff before.
But like, he would be quite emotional when it comes to having to kill an animal that was his, but he would still see it completely justifiable for feeding his family. He's self-sustainable. And like some of his videos, he's crying, but he would tell you, why he's doing it, and he would completely be able to come to terms with it and everything else.
Seems crazy though to do. You use the word upsetting. Well, if something is upsetting, for me that signals that there's something not right there. If something was a necessity and it was morally justifiable, I wouldn't find it upsetting necessarily, but I find it's an interesting word. And the fact that he cries, just don't do it. Like we have sanctuaries. Just why do you use the word upsetting?
Because death isn't happy.
That's true.
It's not a happy thing, but I don't think we can.
But not happy for us or for the animal who is
for
killed.
both, sort of. It's a necessity for survival. But I don't think life is possible without death.
Of course not. No, yeah.
And even with animals, when you look at them, they're hardly happy when they kill. They know they have to, and they do it. And I know that it's a good product, and I obviously believe in the environmental, obviously not factory farming, but I believe they're killed in the most least brutal way.
But you say least. This is another thing. Least brutal. But there's still almost an acknowledgement that it is brutal. It's just it could be worse, and just because something could be worse doesn't mean that it's moral or acceptable as it is.
Yeah, but stunning and killing, and it's like putting the cow to sleep.
But even I think. I feel that's a little bit disingenuous in the sense of we know that they're putting these trucks in trailers and they're taken to a slaughterhouse and and they're putting the stun pens, right? I mean, if you've been in a slaughterhouse, right? Okay, so that they're putting those stun boxes and then the bolt will put in the head, and that process is terrifying for them. And even if it is when the bolt's in, maybe that's the last thing of life they have. But up until that point, and even if we take the best case scenario, it's lovely and. The farmer just gently cradles the animal as they pass on, to wherever they go next. But they still have value in their life and would still rather live their life than be killed. Do you disagree? I mean, surely, like, if they were granted a choice and that choice was being killed, you're right in saying that death is just as much a part of life as anything else. And in fact, death is so important to life. I mean, everything and everyone must die. I mean, of course, but that fact alone doesn't justify taking life in the sense of that doesn't justify us killing each other or even killing, a lion in the wild or a dolphin in the ocean or a dog on the street. We can't justify murder of humans or murder of animals by saying, well, they will one day die and everyone needs to die.
Yes, but then I wouldn't look at an animal in the same way I would look at me or you. I wouldn't place them on that high pedestal. I wouldn't call myself an animal worshipper or anything. But
you don't need to. You can still acknowledge in your eyes that humans are a different level to other animals, but that doesn't justify taking their life.
But for us to eat and for us to get that nutritional product, I think it does justify it.
Even if we don't have to.
But it's the easiest and obviously the way I think the most environmental friendly way.
When we say easiest, I mean, you've got to, we talked earlier about how it can be dangerous working with cows. We've got to breed them in, we've got to spend money, we've got to take land, it takes time. So when we're talking about ease, I mean, it's probably a lot easier just to grow some crops so that don't have the worry, that don't need the veterinary bills or the antibiotics or any of these issues. So when we talk about ease, it's probably one of the hardest ways of getting our nutrients.
Well, I would disagree again because
that's okay.
Crops are, I think, harder sometimes. Animals obviously, I think they do a lot of the work themselves. Whereas the crop, an animal grows, whereas the crop you're constantly watching, you're constantly growing it. An animal, they take these nutrients from the grass, they can convert them into things that we can make ourselves, and that's where we get them. We can get them from the animals, and we can't eat grass. A lot of people would say
no, but we can eat other plants.
Yeah, but I know a lot of people would think that animals products high in cholesterol, but then there's two different types of cholesterol.
Yeah, the good and the bad. The good that we produce and the bad that
but
they
we
give
actually
us.
Need cholesterol from animals, because if you're eating an animal-based diet, your body it makes as much cholesterol as it needs to due to your diet. So if you were to cut all that out, we also get dietary cholesterol from animals. And when I was talking to Christina at that debate,
just to read the context, Ryan saw an AV in Belfast as an activist that I know called Christina, and he had a big on conversation with her. Sorry, carry on.
She would say to me, egg yolks are filled with cholesterol, but they're actually filled with high density lipoprotein cholesterol, which is actually beneficial to us. But when vegan activists would say that to some member of the public, they would just think cholesterol bad, don't want it. I think that's sort of where false facts can get spread. And I do believe that, animal meat is a good nutritional product that can outweigh some things that we can get from plants, and that can be a better way for our bodies to absorb it.
I mean, the issue, I guess, with the thing about cholesterol is, as we established, our body does produce cholesterol, and through what we eat and our lifestyles, we can help our body produce more cholesterol, less cholesterol. But dietary cholesterol, it does cause a whole host of health problems, including atherosclerosis, our number one killer, and things like that. And so, consuming maybe a few of these products isn't going to cause a whole host of health problems, but a continuation of doing so leads to a buildup of all these things that our body doesn't need. And, what is it? I'm very conscious of moving back to where you were, so I'm going to keep that in my mind, but I also don't want to skip past your points as well. What is it that say that cholesterol from animal products, what does it do that benefits our body? In what sense does it help?
Well, cholesterol from animals, cholesterol is needed. Most cells, the walls of them are all contain cholesterol. HDL cholesterol takes LDL cholesterol away from the blood, which is bad cholesterol, which we can get from a whole host of foods. And that's why HDL cholesterol is needed. And then also cholesterol is obviously needed in the body, very importantly. But
why does our body, why is the cholesterol that our body produces naturally, why does that not suffice, in the sense of why do we need to have more cholesterol when our body is already attuned to producing the cholesterol we need for cell maintenance and for other circulatory or biological purposes?
It's probably due to why we needed to eat meat in the first place. Why we are built to eat meat.
Well, why did we need to eat meat in the first place? What do you think the reasoning for that would be?
We were made as omnivores. I don't really like.
Well, I mean, I think if we look throughout our history, we evolved. I mean, I don't know about your religious beliefs, but if we take an evolutionary thing, so we evolved from primates who ate predominantly plant-based, if not entirely plant-based.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know some primates will have they'll scavenge maybe or have termites and insects, but we evolved from predominantly plant-based diet, and the evolution of consuming meat came during, I think it was the Stone Age or the Ice Age, basically in a time of food scarcity, and so we survived for a long time on plant-based sources, and then the inclusion of animal flesh came at a time more of necessity to get calorie-dense foods during maybe colder seasons or from times where there wasn't the abundance of plants due to environmental changes and such. And so our body wasn't. If our body needed these products, then we'd have always had to have consumed them from kind of our early biological forms, so to speak. I mean, yes, our brains have evolved, but our digestive tracts have not really changed, and the makeup and physiological construction of our bodies not necessarily changed.
Yes, but then it's sort of hard to know if that is really what happens. It's all up in the air.
Okay, I mean, all right. Yeah, okay. So if you're happy to maybe take it back to where we were.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we were at separation of cows, and we were talking a little bit about slaughterhouses. And so, treat me as like a layman. You've been in an abattoir before. Take me through the process of what happens. So you've been on the farm. The cows have been loaded into the trailer or the truck.
Yeah.
They've been driven to the abattoir. So now take me through that process.
So they're offloaded off into holding pens or wherever they're. Maybe if they're going straight to slaughter, or they're in holding pens. And then they're brought through, and then the whole process of stunning them, and then
and describe that process.
They're just put into sort of similar to what we'd use to process them, as in if they needed injections or whatever. It's what you call a crush, but when you say crush, people go, "You're crushing them," but you're not. It just sort of stops them from moving.
A metal cage of sorts.
And then they're just stunned on the head.
And how are they stunned?
It's like prongs, isn't it?
For cows, it's not.
Yeah.
It's always a bolt with a cow. I don't think they can use electricity. Oh. Sheep, it's normally electricity. Yeah. Pigs, it's normally electricity. Or they're gassed, of course. But with cows, it'll always be the bolt gun.
Bolt gun's just straight through the front of the head.
Into the skull, to render them unconscious. The metal cage, so to speak, opens up. They come down,
and then they're
shackled by the legs onto the bleeding line or the hanging line, and then the term would be stuck, I guess, right? But what that means is their throats are cut, or that there's a laceration placed on their throat, and then they bleed out. That's the process.
Yep.
Does that we said before least brutal, and so what would be kind of a I guess the word is humane, isn't it? Do you believe that's humane, that process?
I believe humane's thrown all around. Like people say, how can it be humane to kill an animal? But humane killing came about from things that we do, like killing, but in the easiest way. Like humane isn't. I think that if you say humane way to kill somebody, it'd be quick and painless.
but it would also be in their best interest.
Well, I'd say if you asked an animal, what way do you want to be killed, they would want it to be,
But I mean, by best interest, I mean like if you were suffering, like a euthanasia for a dog, I would consider euthanasia to be humane because it's in the animal's best interest. But I don't think we could argue that it's in the cow's best interest to be bolted in the head and then, blade across the throat when they're like 18 to 2 years, or in dairies, they can live, maybe 14 years longer than maybe they do. Would you say that it's in the cow's best interest or in the animal's best interest what happens in the slaughterhouse?
No, but it is producing food.
How can we place the word humane then? I mean, the word humane is applied to these situations. I think it probably comes from like humanity, like almost like, where's your humanity is almost like, where's your compassion? Where's your benevolence? Which interestingly are two synonyms for humane, benevolence and compassion. So when we say like, where's your humanity? It's almost like, where is your humaneness? And so in the sense of killing animals, would you say that to take the life of an animal is compassionate or benevolent?
It's compassionate I wouldn't say it's compassionate in the actual act of killing them. Humane is sort of thrown around. I don't use it that much.
So you don't think the slaughter is humane?
Maybe wouldn't use the humane.
What word would you use for the slaughter?
Just least discomfort. They try, like, it's constantly changing slaughter rules and they're constantly bringing in new things and everything else. And a lot of people are advocating for like no halal or things like that because of the brutality of it. But I would just say like it's just the easiest and quickest way for them. Try and make it the least painful, least distressing, least discomfortable process.
But it's this word least all the time, isn't it?
Because killing someone is going to be, it's not going to be the nicest thing. So you have, you can't say, oh, it's going to be really good.
Yeah, I appreciate your honesty. You use the word someone. Now, up until this point, you've used it to describe animals. And in this moment, you use the word someone. Do you think that animals are someones, so to speak?
I wouldn't see them as in a person, obviously, but they all are different. I wouldn't see an animal as a thing. I do see it as a being. We care for animals like no other, I'd be scratching them and petting them and everything else. So it is very hard. Obviously, I'm not directly in the beef industry, but I have had to see cows put down or cows be killed, and it is hard. But we do accept it because we know what they're used for and we know what we use them for.
Yeah, I actually really appreciate using the word someone. One of the things that annoys me sometimes, I have discussions, and I don't know, maybe you've seen them where people will ardently tell me that animals are not individuals and they don't have personalities and they don't have like likes and dislikes. And I think part of that is maybe to make it a little bit more easy on the conscience if we just group them all as these are cows and they are all the same, and we put a number in their ear just because that's all they are, then they're a number. And so I actually admire you for saying that, because I think it shows there's a little bit more of a maybe, I don't want to use the word awareness, it sounds almost patronizing. I'm not trying to patronize you in that sense, but I appreciate you saying that. But to me it also makes it a little bit more uncomfortable, because the acknowledgement of them being individuals then for me makes the death even less palatable, because it's not just a grouping of this kind of very plain and ordinary species of animal that we just that's their purpose. This cow was different to the cow before, and the cow that's about to have the bolt in the head is different to the cow who's hung up on the line bleeding to death. Do you think that the recognition of them as being individuals makes the act of what happens to them less or more palatable to you?
I wouldn't use the word palatable. Like, it doesn't make it any less right or wrong in a sort of sense, because obviously I believe that it is right. Maybe not right as in what the animals will want, but right in what is best for us. People ask me, how can you name a cow? Do
you name the cows? Sorry to interrupt.
Some of them, yeah.
Okay.
We have names for the ones that would really stand out. I've named them and stuff.
Stand out. What do you mean by stand out?
Just be really different, You just, like, some cows they're not, obviously you recognize them as being a different cow, but they just are just get on with it and understand. But some cows are just like trouble.
Trouble? In what sense are they trouble? Like cheeky, mischievous?
Yeah. Or just really friendly. Some guys would run away from you if you come near them. Some guys would be coming up to you. There's one guy, if she's behind you, would headbutt you while you're walking, and it's a nightmare. But
I can imagine.
Yeah, but people say, how could you? Now, obviously, our dairy cows aren't killed all the time, so it sort of would make it easy in that sense. I've never really been with a beef herd and been naming them and everything else, but I do think I would still be able to deal with it because of what we do get from them. And
yeah, you said making it easier. So do you think the process of, if you made a connection with an animal, like they were a bit friendlier, or you were able to give them like a, little rubs and, whatever it is that you do with those animals that you make more of a connection with on the farm, is the concept of waving them off at the truck as they're taken to the abattoir, is that a difficult process? Do you ever feel guilty or upset, or you just get back on with your day, you've got a job to do and that's that?
No, it is a tough process. It's not easy. I know farmers that would have, let's say they have a herd of cows that are coming up to kill, and they have it on the calendar, and they would be up all night sort of thinking about it, or not up all night beating themselves up or anything, but they would be sort of, people say, oh, you don't even think of it as an animal, but a lot of farmers, they love their animals and they do really build connections, and it is hard, but they know what you have to keep in mind what the end product, or what the animal will come to in your head, and what sort of good it is.
Yes, I find that it breaks my heart, and yeah. I think one issue that I'm always really really concerned about is sometimes this idea that farmers must just inherently be evil and just have a complete disregard for animal life and stuff. And I don't think that paints a very fair picture. But it kind of breaks my heart because I feel like there's this strange tussle going on where it's like, I really like these animals, or I've grown a connection with this particular herd or this particular individual, but it's almost like they feel, and I don't know if you feel the same way, like there's an obligation. I've got to do this. This is my job. This is what has to be done. Therefore, like, I can't let these emotions get the better of me. And it's like, there's nothing wrong with thinking, if you're up all night, or you're thinking, oh, I really like this animal, then they don't have to die, They don't have to die. That's for me is the bottom line in this scenario. And if they did, it'd be different. But for me, it's just, I can't come to terms with it. It's I think about people that have pets and their dogs, and in that moment where they've been euthanized, and because they love the dog, it's so heartbreaking. It's like losing a family member. And maybe there's not quite the connection with farmers and their animals, but there must be some part of that connection where it's like, these cows have been part of my life for maybe even years, right? But on this one morning or this one evening or whenever that truck comes up, all of that time we spent together, the years potentially, all leads up to this one moment where they're put in this trailer, and then within hours, they're going to be dead. And they don't have to be.
You see, you believe that they don't have to be. Vegans would believe they don't have to, whereas we would believe they do have to be in order to feed people, because we don't believe in the vegan world being sustainable.
If it could be proven, right? Say, obviously I'm not necessarily going to be able to prove this to you today.
Yeah.
If it could be proven, right, without a shadow of a doubt in your mind, that it could be sustainable and it is also healthy to be vegan, would you stop then? If those doubts could be taken away from you, what would then encourage you to keep doing farming? If
we were told, veganism, without a shadow of a doubt, it's been proven, everything, we probably would, or I think more people would. Me, myself, in some aspects, with killing animals, maybe. But with products like milk and eggs, I wouldn't be so inclined to just stop, because obviously I believe the milk is very nutritious and everything else. But probably with the killing aspect, if everything was proven, and I don't have the facts that obviously I believe, but it's all up in the air, because the way I look at veganism sometimes is that it's quite new.
I think as a Western idea it is, but I think that people have been abstaining from eating animal products for years, and often people in impoverished areas don't eat animals out of necessity. But please, carry on.
And then you sort of like a generation's come by, like my granny, who's been eating meat since she was young, and she's lived till and it's hard to be so willing to something that cuts out so much when you do have all this in front of you, and you do have all the facts for, it's hard to believe all these new studies that are coming up and everything else. And, it's hard to believe studies sometimes because
Yes. We should always scrutinize studies,
Yeah,
vegan
exactly.
or non-vegan. If you're a vegan listening, don't just take something on face value
Yeah.
because it's vegan, And I agree with you with challenging those studies. But at the same time, those studies are emerging. And regardless of what the study is, there's always going to be a moment where the studies are new. And for decades, we've had studies related to, plant-based, foods. The environmental stuff, not so much. How much will it take? What would that study? Because there's some of the environmental ones I quoted have been published, in the most credible scientific journals in the world, and that they are considered to be the most comprehensive, and they've got years of backing behind them. And there isn't necessarily there isn't industry funding. It's not the Vegan Society dishing out millions of pounds to get these studies completed, like sometimes happens with animal agriculture. Where the beef industry or the egg industry will pay for studies.
Yeah.
There probably isn't an answer to this. It's probably not fair for me to ask this, but at what point do you then say, okay, this is this comprehensive study. It's in this journal. Perhaps I should listen. What there isn't really an answer to this. My question was going to be, what does it have to show? But you can't answer that, so that's not fair for me to ask you. Okay, so let's kind of edge back. We were talking about like naming animals and that, and you said that it was challenging and it was hard. And what do you think of? Have you heard of that farmer Jay Wild? He was in that 73 Cows, the BAFTA, recently just won a BAFTA.
Oh, I heard about it in your last podcast, but I've never...
Okay. So the story is he was a cattle farmer. I think it was just cattle, maybe dairy, but I think it was just beef farming. And one day he had a change of heart and he donated all his cows to Hillside Animal Sanctuary. A story like that, does it make you think, oh, that's a nice thing? Or does it make you think that's a betrayal of farming? How does that make you feel?
It's not a betrayal of farming because I think everyone has a choice. And, they can make that choice educated, whatever they want to believe in. And he made that choice. And obviously then there's the happy ending. The guys get to live the rest of their life.
Happy ending.
But to the public eye, I would be happy.
Yes.
They'd all see it as cows get to live happy. And that's what you want to do. But I wouldn't say, oh, he's done an amazing thing. We should do the same. Or everyone else should do the same. I wouldn't sort of think that way.
Okay.
Because I do obviously believe in eating meat and animal products.
Do you understand maybe the part of him that encouraged him to do it? Do you think, oh, I can understand how he got to that point, or I understand the mechanisms or the mindset that brought him to that decision?
Sort of. It's quite a rash thing to do. Someone you've built your whole livelihood up to then sell it. So I think he would have to be in, I would never sort of see eye to eye with doing that sort of mass thing. He obviously had quite, he was obviously quite certain on doing it. So
yeah, he was. With the calves, before we get to the end of it, I kind of want to work through each process.
Yeah.
And so, have you've picked the calf up yourself, taken them away from the mother, and the first time you did that, you might have alluded to earlier, but the first time you did that, was there something in your head that said, "Oh, I don't know if I like this," or anything like that?
Sort of, from watching farming fridges, I knew that it was a process. Some people don't.
Yes.
When you say to people, they're like, cows get taken away. There was never really any real guilt because obviously before I ever did it, I was obsessed with farming, constantly researching and everything else and reading up things. And I did deem it right when I did first start helping out and stuff. But then you see, there's other things. There was a farm in America, a couple of farms in America that started working on the calves would be with the cows during the day, taken away at night, and the cows would only be milked in the morning.
Okay.
Obviously, they're not producing as much, but then it's stopping the whole calf separation, and that would be if we were to stop consuming as much dairy as we were.
Yeah.
That would be a way we could go. It was a smaller sort of farm, but basically they were just taken away at night. Cows milked in the morning, so they produced the 12 hours to what they give in the morning, and then during the day, the calves are with her, which I thought was a good way, but would only be possible on a mass scale if we were to reduce.
Yeah,
and it would be
tricky, inconvenient almost, I guess, the process of taking the cows back and forth, and
it'd be a bit more work. But he didn't seem like cows and calves were sort of able to sort themselves out when they put them into the field, whose was whose. But I think if you were to take a dairy cow to a sanctuary, you'd have to do something similar, sort of. Like, how would an ex-dairy cow or a dairy cow, let's say vegans took a dairy cow to an animal sanctuary, what do they do with her milk, or do they milk her, or what do they?
Well, she'll dry. So what will happen is at the beginning they'll milk her because they have to, and then when she dries, that they just don't re-impregnate her again. But at the beginning, of course, if she's still producing milk, then of course they have to take that milk.
And so do they? She's just with no bull or anything, so she can't get pregnant again or anything. She's just with other.
Yeah, I mean,
females.
I'm trying to think of examples where there would be a bull. I mean, I don't think I've ever been around a sanctuary where there's the bulls with the female cows, or if there are, they will be castrated probably. So I think one thing that sometimes happens is if animals are brought into sanctuaries and they still have their testicles, or they'll be castrated to avoid those problems, and that would be done on like a welfare ground of like it's not. It needs to be done for that animal's safety and for the other safety of the animals. Bulls or even rams. Animals, cockerels. My goodness, are pretty vicious at times. So any male animal, interestingly enough, who is sexually allured by the females around, can be a danger. So sometimes it's done on those grounds.
So you believe it's okay to neuter or castrate animals
in times
without their consent?
In times of necessity. I know what you're alluding to because we're talking about maybe the castration of, say, sheep in farms. I think the thing about sanctuaries is they're trying to make the best out of a bad situation. And so it's not something that we want to have in the future. But if the option is the animal goes to a slaughterhouse, or the animal gets to live life in a sanctuary and is castrated as a result of that, and we can use the word mutilation because it is a mutilation. That mutilation would therefore be morally justifiable because it has the animal's best interest at heart. But an animal that's bred into existence therefore then has to go through mutilations like tail docking or disbudding or castration to then just be used and then killed. Those mutilations, they're not justified because of the whole lifespan, not lifespan, but the whole reasoning behind it and the purpose behind that. It's not. I mean, farmers will argue that some of these things like tail docking, tail docking is an interesting one, but let's say disbudding are done with the interest of the animals, but it's not necessarily true. It makes the farming processes easier, and a lot of these mutilations are done to make the processes easier and sometimes more profitable, not just to help animals with certain farming problems, so to speak. And what do you think about that? Because in your head you might think, well, that's a bit hypocritical.
Yeah, sometimes I would think that like you would be completely fine with dogs and all being neutered.
I think they have to be. I mean, we have a huge issue with animals in shelters, homeless animals on the street. Globally, it's horrific. In the UK, it's, animals in shelters is a big problem. So I think we have responsibilities to neuter these animals because there's so many being euthanized and put down every single day that, for me, that's a really heartbreaking thing. And again, it's one of those things where it is a mutilation and it's done without consent. And I'm sure a male animal probably wants to have that sexual urge and we take that from them. And of course, on paper, that doesn't sound good, but in the context of what it prevents or what it helps, then it becomes a justifiable act. If I was to breed a dog into existence, neuter them because I wanted to reduce their aggression and stuff just so I could keep them in a pen and then kill them, well, that wouldn't be justifiable. But in the context of we need to reduce the population sizes, we have animals being euthanized, it does become justifiable. That's what I think.
Yeah.
What do you think?
You see, you would obviously always look at the animal's best interest.
No. If it was proven a necessity, I mean, this becomes tricky. But if people often point at Eskimos, for example. I'm not going to point the finger at them necessarily. The idea of necessity is what I think is most pertinent. But in a situation where we don't have to harm animals, then their best interests that come into play. But if you were dying and you needed to eat a piece of cow to survive, I wouldn't be like, no, because I think that in times of necessity, the things become morally justifiable. For example, there was a plane crash, and I think it was in the Andes, humans, of course, obviously plane crash. And right, and so some of them survived, but the only way they survived was because they cannibalized and ate the other humans who had died. It doesn't justify cannibalism, but in the time of necessity, it became a morally justifiable act to eat their friends,
Yeah.
But it wouldn't justify me, eating my friend, right? So that's. So yes, I wouldn't always put the animal's best interest, but in a situation like this, because we should, I think.
But you see, that's when a lot of farmers sort of do see it as morally justified because they do believe we need to eat meat and we need to consume animal products in order to be healthy and live a long life. So the whole sort of moral side doesn't play on their mind as much because they do deem it morally justifiable.
And that's that. I think that is the crux of it, right? They see it as an act that is necessary, whereas we believe that it's I don't want to condescend, but we know that it's an act that's not. And you're going to say, well, that's not true. But I have to say that because of
your views. Yeah.
Exactly. And for me, if I say believe, it does an injustice to what is true. But again, that sounds like I'm being condescending. I really don't mean to be that way. Okay, so you've separated the calf. So you take the calf. Out of interest, how many calf separations did it take before you just did it without thinking? Before you just could go into the pen, pick them up, and walk off? 3, 4, 5? How many do you think it was?
I'm not sure. I know vegans throw the word desensitized a lot, that people become used to it and then they can keep doing it. I do believe that's true, but I always do think about it, never in that bad a way. Let's say this cow's being reared to go back into the herd. I'm always like, oh, you'll see her soon, or, they probably...
So you talk to the cow and almost like to reassure them.
Give them a pet and everything else, and they probably won't have the same connection when they're back in the herd or whatever, but I'd always just say, oh, we'll keep her safe or whatever,
but you won't keep her safe. You'll send them, you'll kill her in the long run,
but we'll give them the best life we can up until the killing.
But that's not the best life. The best life isn't that. The best life is a life where they're not artificially inseminated, where they don't have their babies taken away from them, whether their destiny isn't to be a product and it's something on a shelf. So you don't have their safety. You have the purpose of farming, the product at the end, and the money to be obtained. That's the goal, not safety.
But farmers aren't just money driven, because if they were, they wouldn't farm. Farming isn't that big a profitable business as much as people say.
Right.
So
it's a family thing as well sometimes, right?
Yeah,
it's like a heritage, a tradition to them.
And that's why I think a lot of farmers get so defensive. You're attacking their history.
Yes.
And they're coming back with they just don't want to hear it, especially the scrutiny put under. I know in the farming community now, veganism is a big topic, whereas a few years ago, wouldn't have bothered. But it's definitely a big threat and to our businesses. But, we do believe it's morally right, so we don't see, when we're keeping them safe, our goal is to give them as good a life up until the point of killing, and then enjoy what they give us, the products. You can make many things. A lot of things are wasted nowadays, but if we did use everything, which some places still do, people don't eat liver that much anymore.
I always hated liver.
I don't mind it that much, and it is very nutritionally dense because of what it does in the body, but people don't eat it that much anymore because of that whole barrier between an animal and what's on their plate.
Interesting, that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
bizarre.
Probably what ruined the industry.
Maybe so. When you say ruin the industry, what do you mean? What does that mean?
The fact that some things that happen on farms would shock someone, somebody that didn't know, and the fact that people these days aren't educated enough on where their food comes from. So
would you? I mean, you wouldn't say this, but if you're saying because what happens on farms, and you use the word ruining the industry, what I perceive that to mean is the truth is what's ruining the industry, because you say, well, people are realizing, oh, that liver came from an animal, or they hear about something that happens on the farm they didn't know about, which is just true. So when you say that to me, what I think of is the truth is ruining the industry.
Well, I obviously wouldn't say it that way. I say it's that people these days are brought up so no danger, no nothing, so consumed, never put out there, almost never defend themselves. And then when they do hear these things, people are a lot more emotional these days. People take offense to a lot more people.
I know, I agree, and I think that offense culture is quite dangerous.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what I think that does mean is that society has changed to the point where we can take more emotional standpoints, whereas before we had to be, it's not about being callous, but we had to do what we had to do to survive. But now, because we live in a more, I don't know what the word is, but a different world to how we used to, we now have the liberty to have an emotional feeling towards these things that before we weren't afforded that chance to. So maybe it's more like that is actually symbolic of the fact that society is changing to find issues that we didn't used to be concerned about, issues that we now should be concerned about, which is why for me veganism is becoming a moral issue, because we can allow it to be a moral issue now, whereas 500 years ago, of course, it was a different world. So maybe that fact in itself is symbolic of the fact that society is changing. maybe it's not a bad thing. It's progress or it's shift.
Yeah, it definitely is changing in many ways, obviously, but you know, I still believe in all farmers believe in what a great product.
Mm-hmm. A product, yeah. Do you think we're talking about farmers have heritage, families, these kind of ideas, right? Do you think that creates a bias? You know, to the point where, so as a vegan, right? Growing up, I thought British farming, you know, and I still do believe in British farming, just, you know, plant farming, you know, but I thought the whole, like, farmers love their animals. I was in that idea, and then I came out of that idea to the point where I'm at now. But I guess what I'm saying is that there was no real bias. I mean, I didn't want to be vegan, you know, I really didn't want to be vegan at all. I'd love to just, you know, I'd love to have not found reasons to have to do that, so to speak. But at the same time, because farmers, you're unique in that sense. Yeah. But most farmers, because they're raised, you know, it's their family's tradition, and they don't want to let dad and mum down, and they want to make sure they pass it on to their children. Do you think that creates a bias where they won't allow the possibility that what they're doing is wrong or isn't healthy or sustainable? They're just so embedded in the industry, they cannot let the other idea enter their conscious, because to do so threatens not just their money, but their family and their traditions and heritages.
I'd say for a lot of farmers, that probably is one of the reasons, you know. But then, obviously, I'm different. And I know a lot of people out there that didn't come from farms and did get into farming and, you know, don't do morally justify what they do. So it is, but you know, a lot of farms are family, but that's slowly dropping.
It is, yes.
You know, they're trying to find new people to come into the farming industry because people don't want to do it, because it is such grueling work sometimes, and it is intense. You know, 365 days a year, really.
Yeah, you don't get the holidays in the same. You know. Okay, so you pick the calves up. Where do the calves go now? You carry them away. Where's their next destination?
The calf shed. So we have like a wee shed for calves.
And on the small one and the big one, are the sheds? Are they group housing or are they solitary?
On the big one, they're solitary for the first 2 weeks, and then they're in group. In the other one, they're just grouped.
Just grouped. And what do you think about solitary? I mean, it's 8 weeks is the legal allowance, I think, in the UK.
For solitary?
I think so. It's either 6 or 8. Yeah. What do you think about 2 weeks of solitary? What's is it to? Sorry, I keep saying loads of things. Mm-hmm. What is the purpose of the solitary, and do you think that it's ethical?
Solitary main purpose is hygiene, and to be honest, calves can really annoy other calves when they just suck at different parts of them. And like yesterday, I was feeding calves, and one of them was just giving the other one a thumping on. I think it just sort of, and they were quite young, and I think it just sort of, it's a lot cleaner. Sort of gets them onto the milk, gets them sort of growing a bit, so that they're not the small one in the majority. And then when you can put them all together, they're sort of can fight for themselves, or, you know, they can, you know, when you talk about solitary, it's hardly like they're away in a room on their own. They can see other calves, they just can't touch them, you know, and it depends on their solitary, it's just beside each other. And it is really for the best interest of hygiene, because if you have other calves sucking and everything else on them, then it will lead to problems.
Why do they suckle?
Because they're mad for milk.
Because they want to suckle from the mum, right? So and so, what do you feed them? Because they're not getting the mum's milk. What do they get as a food replacement?
So they get the mum's milk for the first 3 days, or 4 maybe, just out of the parlour and then in the bottle, and then it's on to calf replacement milk.
Say that again, sorry.
Calf replacement milk.
It's calf replacement milk. Yeah.
So it's just like powdered hot water. Yeah. Just like you would feed a baby if you weren't breastfeeding.
Yeah.
And then they get put on to might be in a month's time if we still have them, obviously, like wheat grains, obviously a wee bit of meal, and they eat a wee bit of straw and stuff like that. The cows are in the solitary confinement pens, and so in the big dairy farm you work on, it's 2 weeks, and then they moved into group housing, and then they're in group housing until when's their first? Is it 18 months when they have their first cycle of impregnation? Yeah. I've never really followed a calf right the way through. You know, I've only started working on the big farm, and I think it probably 18. Yeah, it would probably be around then.
Yeah,
maybe a wee bit longer, but somewhere around a year and a half.
One of the things that the farmer last week was speaking to me about was he was saying that sometimes the calf that's the semen from the calf. the semen that they use is to produce a calf that would have been natural for the breed of the mother. And so sometimes they can have problems calving. And have you ever experienced or heard or witnessed about a mother cow having problems calving or doing like the splits, where their legs buckle and they use the hobbles to keep, which are chains to keep their legs together? Have you experienced anything like that?
I've never really heard much problems because obviously I'm not that familiar with AI at the minute. I've only started and I've only seen bits. I've heard of a heifer cow, which is one that's never calved before, maybe having a big calf, but I've never seen any problems. I've seen the chains before.
The hobbles, isn't it?
Yeah. I've never seen them in person, but I've seen videos, obviously, just of their feet chain to stop them splitting,
which is a problem with excessive calving, or if they have a big calf, it literally causes them to do the splits on the back, and then after that they'll probably sent to the knackerman. They become a downer cow, or they become not too useful. And what about issues of mastitis and stuff? Is that mastitis is in and of itself? I mean, humans can get mastitis. That's not necessarily the issue. But do you find that when animals have mastitis and they don't respond to, say, the penicillin or the antibiotics, are they just sold for slaughter? What would be like a process with an animal that no longer is profitable to the farmer? What would happen then?
Well, with mastitis, I've never really been one that's been killed, because usually they just would lose the quarter that they're being milked on, or that has a mastitis, and then they'd just be milked on the 3 other quarters.
Yes.
Other problems, though, as you say, like, I've only ever seen cows that have got really ill beyond the point of... I've never been with any... I hear of broken legs and stuff. We've never had any of that trouble. But the only time cows have sort of been killed or sent to slaughter has been when the vet can't really do anything for them.
Yeah.
We've had cows, there's a disease called Yonis.
Right, okay, yeah. Can you describe that?
Yeah, it's sort of... We notice it in the parlour when they go off their food and they're not eating anymore. And then they just slowly... And they don't really want to eat anymore. Although we got this orthopedic stuff, sort of treatment, which is plant-based. It's not really chemical, but we started using it and it seems to be helping. But they just don't eat.
No.
And they just slowly starve, really. So when it gets too far, we'd maybe bulk on them or get the man in the bulk on them, just because.
You bolt them?
I've heard of on the small farm work, and I wasn't there, but he said they had the bulk on it that day because...
On the farm itself?
On the farm, yeah. Because we get a guy in that did, obviously, but because we don't own a bulk on or anything, but because they were just starving to death. It's quite hard to watch. If
an animal, there are obviously fatalities on farms. Naturally, some animals pass away. What happens to the animals when they die on the farm? How do you? I mean, I've seen things of animals being thrown in bins and such.
Yeah.
What would happen to a cow if they died on the farm?
Well, we're not allowed to dump them or bury them or anything by law, obviously, because of environmental problems. So there's 2 places we sort of bring them to. There's 2 sort of processing plants. Obviously, a dairy cow which isn't very, doesn't have very much meat, they're not going to be used for human consumption. So I know they get taken away because obviously the guy comes, sort of in a lorry or whatever, and lifts them up and puts them into the back. And I think they are used for like dog foods and
they are, aren't they?
Other sort of foods.
Yeah. Okay, that's right. I feel like we've been talking for a while, so we'll wrap up in maybe 10 minutes or so. Is that good for you?
Yeah.
But also, I've got a couple more things I wanted to ask, but if there's anything that you've got written down, because I know you have notes, and I'm aware that I've led the conversation somewhat, so I want to give you that time as well. So actually, we don't have to finish in 10 minutes. We can finish whenever you want to finish. It's kind of a cliche question, but I feel like I'm obliged to ask it. I'm going to ask the question, which is, do you think that morally, if we were doing these things to dogs, it would make a difference? If dogs were in slaughterhouses, would you think that was wrong? Like, say Rewilding, for example, where they have the dog meat festival. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think I would see it wrong if dogs were being farmed to eat. I wouldn't see it wrong. It's the fact that the dogs at the Rewilding festival are skinned alive, and you see all these bad videos ever, and they're basically tortured. But I wouldn't see a problem if us as a society, if we ate dog meat for them to be farmed. People say, "Oh, how can you love a dog and kill the other animal?" I know vegans are always saying that, but we don't eat dog.
But it's a cultural thing, you know?
Yeah, definitely it is. Society that sort of determines we love these animals, they're man's best friend and everything else. You know, we wouldn't dare kill them. But I do think if we were eating dog meat on a daily basis, I would not see it in a wrong way.
So you don't think that morally there's a difference between a dog and a pig and a cow and a cat and a chicken? And,
I wouldn't morally. Yeah,
so
an animal is an animal.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and so if I was to go to the RSPCA and I was to adopt a Labrador or any dog, would I be justified to kill them myself? Say that gentleman that we talked about in America who cries when he kills his animals. Yeah. Say I rescued a golden retriever. Could I then be justified, if it was legal, you know, to then take them home and cut their throat and do that myself if I wanted to, in the same way that gentleman in America does?
If you were using that animal and not just killing it to kill it, I wouldn't see, you know, a problem with it. If you were going to eat it, if you were going to, you know, use its fur to make something, if you were going to, I wouldn't see a problem. As long as you didn't, you know, you gave it up until the point of killing, you treated it fairly, I would not see a problem with it.
Yeah, it's interesting because so many people do have that issue, don't they? And I think that's why vegans make that comparison, because it's a striking comparison. We talked right at the beginning about taste, right? Mm-hmm. And do you think that part of the reason why you consume these products is because of the taste? You know, because, you know, if you can get calcium and iron from other places, how much of why you consume those products is because you simply just enjoy them?
I'd say it's sort of 50-50. You know, you start off, obviously, you have to like something to eat it.
Yeah, it does help, right? Yeah.
And I do love meat and milk and eggs, and I always really have, especially proper milk, the raw stuff, you know. And like, I keep my own chickens out the back garden, and I eat their eggs. And
do you kill the chickens at the end?
Because I've never killed my chickens for my own consumption.
Would you?
People always ask me that when they're around, and I think I could. Mm-hmm. I definitely think I could.
What would it take when you say could? What would it take for that? Because if it was just like KFC's closed or Sainsbury's is closed, but I want chicken tonight, would you do it then?
I don't think that would be compelling enough.
What would be compelling enough then?
To need chicken, you know, like. I think more of it's to do with these chickens. Like, I have like a real emotional connection with my chickens because they are in my back garden and everything else. But I'm not saying I have more of an emotional connection with chicken than I have with our cows. But they already serve the purpose of laying us eggs. So to really need to kill them, I would really need chicken. Like, I wouldn't.
But what about when they stop producing eggs? What if it comes to a point where they stop producing eggs and they've got 2 years of life left in them? Would you still keep them, or would you kill them then because they don't serve that purpose anymore?
I'd say I could kill them.
Would you? I mean, I could if I had to. I could, but I wouldn't. So would you? Not could you? Will you?
I don't know if I will or would.
Yeah, but you would go to Sainsbury's or KFC and buy chicken.
Yeah.
You said earlier that you were against factory farming and you wouldn't advocate for factory farming, but you buy products that come from factory farms.
But that's why I wouldn't. You know, we get a lot of our meat from local butchers or whatever. You know, a lot of farmers actually know, like, where their processing plants we go from, you know, where we get our meat. And
where do the chickens and pigs you eat come from?
A lot of ours come from, we get our meat from McDowell's, it's a butcher up the road from us. But I know a couple of the McDowell's family, I know the farmers, you know. I get meat from, there's a butcher in Moira too, and you know, I wouldn't buy factory farm meat.
Do you never go to KFC? Never Sainsbury's, never Tesco's, never restaurants, anything like that? But
you see, that's the thing, that's where you don't know.
But there's a good guess, right? With chickens and pigs especially, you know, unless, I mean, and my goodness, if it isn't factory farm, they're going to make such a song and dance out of it. Yeah. Because it's just, that's the standard. And so if you say, well, you know, I don't advocate for factory farming, but then you buy those products, then you are inadvertently advocating for factory farming.
But that's why I constantly advocate for, you know, at the minute I'm sort of looking at labeling with milk bottles, putting on grass-fed and outdoors, you know, like free-range milk. I've seen a couple of organic milk companies putting on free-range milk and saying that their cows are outside. And I would definitely push for, like, in the future, I would love to be self-sustainable. If I had my own farm, I would definitely, if I was raising chickens, whatever, I would definitely eat my own chickens, probably.
Would you allow yourself to have a connection with them in the same way you do with these ones?
I think It'd be hard not to.
It would be hard not to.
Yeah.
You're right about that. You wouldn't necessarily have the luxury of you not allowing yourself to have that relationship. And if you could say, nip down the road to the greengrocer or wherever and buy something else that meant, because when the day comes and tell me the name of one of your chickens.
There's one called Lucy.
Lucy,
Yes.
okay. So say today you're thinking, right, today's the day Lucy's going to die, but I could not do it and I could do something else, you know. I guess that's the situation as a vegan, I find myself in every day with like, oh, I could do that, but I don't need to. And so every animal for me is like a Lucy in your eyes because I don't need to do that. So it's funny, like you have to have a connection with the animal to contemplate not killing them, if that makes sense. But if you don't have that connection, it's funny because it relates back to what we were saying earlier about how people in society now are more emotional. It's like, well, actually, you are as well, because when you allow your emotion to have that opportunity, you're like, well, I could, but I probably won't. But you won't think twice about going to Sainsbury's and Tesco's and or sorry, with the butchers you said earlier, and buying the products there, even though those animals are also a Lucy.
Yeah, but then I wouldn't believe in it being like, if the world went vegan, I would obviously believe that a vegan world wouldn't work. So I believe that we do need to keep consuming these products and we do need to keep farming these animals in order to be sustainable. Yeah. I know obviously you would disagree, but that's sort of, it's not just eating and taste.
No.
It's what you can gain from that animal and what is going to help you, and
Would you let someone else eat Lucy? Would you let me eat Lucy if I said, you know what, you've convinced me today, I want to go back, but the first thing I want to do is come back to Ireland with you and eat Lucy? Would you let me?
It'd be hard.
But would you? Or would you be like, no, mate, let's just not do that?
Probably wouldn't let you.
Probably. What about, would you let anyone eat Lucy?
Probably not.
Probably not.
But then that's because you do see them as a pet, really. Mm-hmm. And people don't eat pets.
No. But really, there's no difference, is there? It's just the connection you've allowed yourself to have with them that's important in that. And the pet is just really a term used for connection, I suppose. And you've not allowed these other animals to have connection. Not that you've not allowed; they've just not been able to.
Yeah.
I want to give you, so please, if you've got notes written down, you know, and you ask me those questions, because I know we're getting late, and I don't want to wear you out and then not give you a chance to ask you some of the things, allow you to ask some things. So. Let's pass over the buck, so to speak. Do you have any questions or any points you'd like to make towards me?
I just have a couple.
Please.
I was just thinking in terms of poultry. Obviously, factory farmed cage hens. I'd be against that. You'd be against that. Indoors all year round.
Right.
But let's say a chicken, like my backyard chickens, can go wherever they want.
Yes.
We don't really have a boundary because they just escape.
Yeah, they are cunning sometimes, right? Yeah.
They can go wherever they want. They lay an egg once a day. We take that egg, obviously. Mm-hmm. What would you deem wrong with that? Because when it goes to the animal sanctuary, obviously it's going to be doing the same thing,
Yeah. Good question. The issue of backyard eggs comes up a lot, actually. I guessed it by vegans as well.
Yeah.
The podcast I'm releasing tomorrow, I talk about this, actually, but I will address it now as well. There's a biological and also an ethical aspect to it. Biologically speaking, like cows, we've selectively bred hens to produce a lot more eggs than they would naturally, 300, a year. So we're looking at the best part of one a day, as you were saying, your hens probably do. And the egg shell is made purely of calcium, which is why osteoporosis and broken bones is such a huge problem in all systems of egg farming. I think in free-range barns, like 45% of hens suffer from a broken bone. So, just before you interject, if the hens will eat their own eggs, and it's a great way of replacing nutrients. So you can feed the eggs back to them, and if that helps add longevity to their life, because if taking their eggs means that their bones become more brittle and you're not replacing the calcium in their feed necessarily, and all of these things, then that could actually impact their life in the long run. And although the suffering's not as obvious, comparatively to a hen in a cage, of course, but if it can impact their life in a negative way in the long run, and so if we can avert that, then we are obliged therefore to do so. So I say feed the eggs back to the hen. We can reduce the number of eggs that hens like to lay by not encouraging them to lay more. When we take them, it encourages them. If you leave them to try and lay like a clutch, it can reduce the number of eggs, which takes the strain off their body, so it's thinking like that. But for me, veganism is not about saying, we shouldn't harm animals. For me, it's about changing our mentality, and part of that is changing how we view other animals. And a lot of what you've been saying, and this is because this is what you believe, is that animals serve a purpose for us. Whereas I don't believe that. An animal's life is their life and their right. Like in the same way, you serve no purpose for me, I serve no purpose for you. Everyone we see today, their purpose is not to serve us. Now, a chicken's life, their life isn't to serve us. And it's very subtle, but when we take that egg away from them, we're saying the opposite. And my issue is if we remove all animal farming and we lived in the vegan world and now everyone's got rescued hens in the backyard, because it's a nice thing to do and who could argue against that? And then you're taking the eggs, your neighbor Shirley or whoever could be like, can I have some eggs? And you're like, yeah, I mean, why not? It's like a small step. And then Bob from across the road wants eggs. You take another small step and then you can start selling them because there's money. And then before you know it, you have a really small version of a commercialized egg farm. And then it kind of goes from there. And that mentality is why we're here now. It's these animals are here for me and they serve me a purpose. And even on a small scale of taking their eggs, if we reinforce that, it sets a dangerous precedent for continuing down the road again that we don't want to end up down. So for me, if your two options were buying from caged hens and or free range hens and eating those backyard hens, I can't tell you that eating the backyard hens causes as much suffering as the other ones does, because it doesn't. But for me, veganism is a philosophical belief system. It's about changing mentalities about the purpose of an animal. So that's for me why not. But I also appreciate that seems unusual, because even when I was first vegan, I'd have thought that was mental. So I appreciate that to you, you're probably like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
That was a developing idea for me about, first of all, it was animals are suffering in farms and slaughterhouses. I need to stop eating them. And it was like, well, hang on. Using animals in any way is wrong. And it's like, hang on, why do I think an animal serves a purpose for me? That was like my chronological progression to where I am now. So that's what I think.
You say about, leaving eggs and letting them and them eating them and stuff. If you are taking away the eggs, chickens naturally did eat their eggs when they laid like one every 3 months.
Right.
But I believe if a chicken's eating its egg every day, it can only go through that cycle of replenishing nutrients, leaving nutrients so far, to the point that it needs to eat something else too,
Of course, it needs other foods as well. The feed that you feed them it's more of a supplement, supplementary course, so to speak.
Like chickens eat everything really. They're eating food scraps out of the kitchen. They're eating the feed we give them. They're eating insects in the grass.
Yes.
And then, my chickens wouldn't really bother to look at their egg once they've laid it. They're just away off again.
But if you cracked the egg for them, I'm sure they would.
But that's because they're just curious. But then you're left with the eggshell. They wouldn't eat the eggshell.
You can use the eggshell as fertilizer for if you're growing you've got a little home patch of, vegetables or whatever. Use that as a fertilizer or something. But
then if they're not looking twice at it and they're heading on, what is so wrong with me taking it and using it? Because it is so... Well, I believe it is very good for us,
It's for me, it's that mentality that I was discussing.
Yeah,
and I appreciate that doesn't make much sense to you currently. And like I said, a few years ago when I first went vegan, I'd have thought that's just like proper extreme,
Yeah.
But that's what I worry about. And even in the vegan world, if we haven't got over this mentality of an animal's use and purpose, we can slip back into bad habits. And it's not long before selling to your local neighbours equals selling to your local community, which means all of a sudden, it's eggs, and I'm selling them to supermarkets again. And it's just that dangerous road. And for me, we have to get over that mentality. So, because veganism is about animal use, it's not about an abuse, it's not about a farm, it's not about a slaughterhouse. It's just the generic idea of using someone else when we don't have to. It's a philosophical teaching. That's what I hold true to myself about it. And it would be morally it wouldn't be morally right for me to say, well, this is wrong and this is right. There has to be some level of consistency. I don't believe in moral dogmatism. I think we can take that too far, but there has to be a sense of consistency. And I think another thing is just say you meet a vegan and I'm vegan, but I eat eggs from the backyard. You're like, well, hang on. It sends mixed messages of what being vegan means. And I think being vegan means not doing this. So let's just stick to those principles. And so I think it just sends mixed messages to society. Well, it's like, well, vegans eating eggs. And there's this thing called veganism, like a couple of years ago. It kind of died out, thankfully. But veganism is like vegans who eat eggs. And it's like, well, that's not vegan then, is it? That's just vegetarian. So I think vegan means this is what it stands for. Let's not muddy the water with but there's this exception and that exception. That's what I think. I go into a little bit more detail about it in the podcast that is tomorrow, but last week, depending on when you're listening to this. But
But I think that's why it is so hard sometimes to come to terms with. You think on the complete opposite way that we do.
Of course. Of course, it's a process. I didn't used
Yeah.
to, and you don't have to.
Yeah.
You know, even if you morally justify to yourself, morally justify makes it sound really intense. But even if you justify yourself the notion of taking Lucy's eggs, that still doesn't mean you can buy other animal products. You know, it doesn't mean that you can then justify Daisy in the slaughterhouse. You know, or anything like that. It's just one aspect doesn't justify every other aspect, so to speak.
And then, you know, veganism has grown so much from a sort of diet, lifestyle to, you know, what some people are calling a cult nowadays. You know, like, I do believe in some ways it is gone a bit mad.
Do you think I'm part of that cult? That mad bit?
Not really.
But I am. But in terms of what it means to be part of the cult, I do subscribe. But I fit that. You know, I advocate. I'm determined.
I get the better word is more extreme. You know, there's a lot of people that are very...
Describe what being an extreme vegan means, because I'm vegan is, you know, in a way of I don't even eat backyard hens. You know, that's probably extreme.
Yeah, it is extreme, but like you do not. Well, I don't know, but you know, this whole like that Project Calf.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was a whole invasion of privacy and you know, really put people and made people very paranoid. Farmers, you know, giving away their addresses and their farms and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And it was sort of like the human didn't matter.
Yes.
It's just the calf that we care about.
Mm-hmm.
But their people, their families, and, you know, what was it, 9,000 addresses or something? Like,
well, I mean, yeah, it was every dairy farm in the UK, wasn't it? Probably even including the ones you work on, I imagine.
Like, we were all really, you know, people, security and everything just drops.
Describe Project Calf.
Well, I haven't heard the whole thing, obviously, but from what I know of it, it was to combat fed brew dairy.
Yeah.
It sort of came about after Veganuary, and it was the releasing of addresses of farms, dairy farms in the UK.
Yeah, it was basically some vegan activists released the location of every dairy farm in the UK. That's Project Calf. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I can understand from your point of view why you'd see that as it creates a farm is scared.
Mm-hmm. Like scared of it.
I don't mean that like, oh yeah. What I mean is a farmer's fearful that vegans are going to hurt them is what I'm asking.
Even just coming to their farm or vandalism or anything, or just, I know it. All our addresses are out there, but even it just being there on a page for someone to see you're a farmer and know, you know, it is a scary concept, and definitely did strike a lot of, you know, anger.
You said before about like, oh, maybe I'm not part of that. Now, I've trespassed on dairy farms before. So I guess I'm part of that problem.
Yeah.
And when I say, but I would never. I think there's me personally, if I trespass onto a dairy farm, I'm scared of what the farmer will do to me, and probably, you know, just as much as the farmer's scared what I would do to him. And so for Project Calf, for me, the situation is, I think it is the obligation of a civilized society to shine light on an injustice. Now, you don't believe it's an injustice, which is where the problem lies. Yeah. But for us, we think what happens to animals, or we know what happens to animals, is an injustice because it causes them the suffering and pain. And so, as you say, those addresses are already available online. The difficulty is you have to kind of come across them by chance. You know, it's a random thing just to find a dairy farm on Google Maps, right? But now it's consolidated them all. And this is a hard thing, because there's no reason for farmers to be scared of their own safety. I mean, yes, of course, there's the issue of, you know, people trespassing, taking footage. And actually, so I run an animal rights group called Surge, co-run it. We released an expose into a dairy farm on Tuesday with hidden cameras placed in the farm. And that farm, what the hidden cameras revealed was farmers punching the cows, kicking them, twisting their tails, sorts of things that you probably find deplorable as well. And I'm not grouping I'm not saying it, please don't. But through us trespassing, not us, but through the people that obtained the footage trespassing, they gave us the footage to release. Through them trespassing on that farm and putting the cameras up, they revealed something that you yourself would agree is horrible, right? Kicking, you know, swearing at them, twisting their tails, punching them, just horrible things. So would you not say that act of trespassing was justified because it shone light on something that's wrong?
It was justified maybe afterwards, but initially there's no justification, because like you justify releasing addresses and whatever for the animals, whereas I would never see it justifiable to post someone's address and label them with their career when they haven't given you consent.
Consent's a funny one, isn't it? Because we talk about consent, and you're right. There's vegans sometimes say, well, animals can't consent to this, but I mean, you're right in the sense the farmers didn't consent to that. But you agree that after the footage came out, it was justifiable
in that case. But I'm sure there's been plenty of cases where maybe farmers haven't been brutal towards cows.
Not in the same way, but there again, there's no harm there's no stories of farmers being hurt from anything like this happening.
Yeah, but surely it's complete invasion of privacy.
What about an invasion of someone's body?
Yeah, but we don't, obviously I don't justify AI, so...
Oh, we're not even like that process, but just the commodification of someone's body.
But then I wouldn't place them on the same level as a human being.
But you don't have to. Because if the notion of someone's farm being revealed on Google Maps compared to someone's body being being commodified and ultimately killed, you don't have to put them on a human's life on the same level as an animal's life necessarily to objectively believe that something's that it's wrong, even if they are a non-human animal. It's a tricky one, and I understand why it would be a bone of contention, just more than a bone of contention. I understand why it would potentially even scare farmers, but that's part of why I'm concerned about the growing dynamic. Is farmers shouldn't be scared of vegans for their safety. In the same way, I'd really hope that vegans shouldn't be scared for their safety, but I know many vegans are, and myself, I sometimes am with situations that I'm in as well. And I think the media has a big role to play, creating this division, vegans versus farmers, when all we need to do is sit down and chat like you and I do. And that's why I want to do this, because, I believe that through releasing that footage, the act of what we did was justifiable. But as you rightfully say, well, not rightfully, but as the point you make is, well, how did you justify it in the beginning? And they justify it by saying, well, because this happens on farms, and it's the role of a civilized society to root out things that happen that are immoral. But
then I wouldn't see the killing as immoral.
No, it's tricky.
That's why it's so.
Do you think that people have a responsibility to be aware, though? And because farming often doesn't divulge, February Dairy is about like the idea of making the dairy industry transparent. But the only thing I ever get told from February Dairy is, here's a video of my cows grazing. You can get calcium from milk. But I don't see footage of people walking off with dairy calves in their hands saying, this is February Dairy. I don't see footage of animals in slaughterhouses. If you want to be, I'm not saying you, but if the industry wants to be transparent, then you've got to show the whole picture, because then I don't feel the need to release footage taken from hidden cameras because you're being completely transparent. But I feel like that transparency is what scares the farming industry. But why? Why not be completely transparent? Where's the footage of Ryan carrying the calf out of the pen, saying, "This is February Dairy. This is dairy. Embrace it."
But then I think that's getting a lot better. Like there was a big campaign because of people not knowing this. There's a Facebook page called New Zealand Farming Girls or something. I think it's run by these two girls from New Zealand.
Yeah.
And they would post all these things. They did a post on cows being in solitary pens, explained why, the reasons why for doing it. They did one on why calves are separated from mothers.
Yeah.
They explained everything. They did one on antibiotics and stuff being in milks and mastitis. They did a post all thing of each one, and I think they are growing to talk about these things, and people are being more transparent with it.
Do you think that's because vegans are bringing light to these things that otherwise, because this has been happening for decades, but it's never been discussed, but now it is. But I think that's because vegans are making a big deal out of it. And so farmers are now thinking, well, I better respond to this, because otherwise people are going to draw judgments based on what the vegans are saying.
It probably is. Vegans are talking about all this and showing everything. And I'd say people did know about it until it became commercial. And all superstores and everything else. We sell our milk straight from the farm. People are up at the farm. They say, "Can we go see the calves?" I'll show them. I would never be like, I would never not want to show anyone around our farm because there's nothing I deem wrong.
So in essence, if a vegan came walking on your farm to film or to put hidden cameras up, what would be your concern? There would be no concern then. What's
hidden cameras? If they came and consented and said, "We'd like to film something," can we? Completely fine. If they came in the dark at night, set up cameras without me knowing, I just see it as complete invasion. It's like someone going into your house and saying, "Oh, can we see what you're doing on a daily basis?" And if you've got nothing to hide, you're doing nothing criminal, you wouldn't mind that much.
Would you let me come on your farm?
Yeah.
And would you let me film?
Yeah.
Film you taking the calf. I can obviously film the AI. Could we go to the abattoir together and film? Obviously, it wouldn't just be your permission, but theoretically speaking,
theoretically, I would not have a problem with it. Knowing what I do, I don't deem it wrong. I don't, I wouldn't have nothing to hide.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I feel like part of the process is hidden, and so I think that air of transparency in itself, and it is, and the interesting thing from that is if you just film something objectively, so say it is something about the separation or the artificial insemination, it's a complete objective documentation of what's happening. So I'm filming and I'm going, this is horrible, and you're doing it and you're thinking this is fine. Then the emphasis is put on what the person without the biases. So you and I are going to have our own individual biases. I'm going to be like, oh, this is terrible, but if you just released it and then people draw their own conclusions, well, that's their own conclusions. There's something powerful about that.
Exactly.
Well, maybe we'll see each other again. But do you have anything else you'd like to ask? Any other questions? Any other notes you got wrote down? Something I said earlier that you didn't have time to respond to that you want to pull me up on? Anything like that? There's no pressure either.
Not really. I don't think so. I think you've sort of covered.
Are you happy with how this conversation's gone?
Yeah.
You feel like you've had a chance to express yourself, and good.
Yes,
good.
Definitely.
I'm happy to hear that. That's what I want. That's just I like talking. It's interesting, and I learn from you.
Exactly.
And I think that's the point of it. I feel it's interesting. I'm sure in many ways maybe you feel like how your preconceptions through talking about it, you can kind of reaffirm them to yourself. Likewise, I feel like I can reaffirm them to myself. And it's like what I was saying about objectively filming. This is such an objective conversation. There's no animosity. There's nothing. It's just you're saying what you believe. I'm saying what I believe, and then it's down to whoever's listening to come up with. And that's the way, isn't it? That has to be the way.
You have to come in and think, I'm definitely not going to change your mind.
No,
you're probably not going to change my mind.
Probably
it's
not.
up to who's listening to make the decision.
Yes.
And it's all about choice, I do believe.
Yes, I agree. A choice, and for me that choice is I factor in the choice of the animals who like to live. Anyway, look, we've been speaking probably a long time. It's quite late now here at the time, so let's wrap it up now if you're happy to do so. Thank you so much for coming in today. I'm going to do a little thing. I did buy Ryan Greg's vegan sausage roll. I actually bought him and his girlfriend a couple, so I hope you enjoy them.
Thank you very much.
I'd offered, we were going to go to Unity Diner. I've only got a really short amount of time with Ryan. I was like, I'm going to get Greg's vegan sausage roll. We're going to go to Unity Diner. I'm going to, make, we might not have time to do all those things, but I was like, let's do this properly. But anyway, look, whatever we do after this, I'd like to remain in contact.
Yeah, definitely.
I would be interested in coming over and visiting you in Northern Ireland. You've come over here to do this and talk to me. So I would be interested to maybe come and come to one of your farms, both of them ideally maybe, and just, I've been on farms before, but that doesn't mean there isn't something. So I'd love to go maybe, and if we can figure out something where I can film, we can talk about it.
Yeah.
But the point is, I'm really grateful you're here. Thank you for coming. It's been a journey for you, and I want to remain in contact.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. And if you've got anything else to add, this is the time. But if not, we'll say goodbye.
Not really. Just thank you very much. It's been a good conversation.
It has.
I'd like to keep in contact too.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening. I hope you've found this enjoyable and you've taken something from this. Vegan, non-vegan, whatever. There's plenty for us to learn, and conversation and dialogue, I think, is so essential. Whether or not Ryan thinks I'm part of the vegan cult, I think maybe I am. Maybe we'll see. But anyway, hope you've all enjoyed listening. I'll see you next week on the next episode of the Disclosure Podcast. But until then, have a great week, and we will speak soon.